This is the World Vision Report. I'm Peggy Waymeyer. The 1990s was a decade of quiet growth for many small towns in the South. That's because immigrants from Mexico and Central America were pouring in to work in chicken plants, factories, and farms. The influx was changing the face of the South. Journalist Paul Cuadros has written about this Latino migration. He focused his research on Siler City, North Carolina. That's where he put down his roots and even became the high school soccer coach. Paul Cuadros wrote a book about his experience. It's called A Home on the Field, and it's the assigned reading for incoming freshmen this week at the University of North Carolina. We asked Paul to tell us what Siler City was like before the wave of immigrants arrived.
Back in 1990, there was probably about 1% of the town was Hispanic. Today, it's estimated that the town is more than 50% Hispanic, and probably still growing. I mean, we'll know for sure after the 2010 census.
How did the residents of Siler City respond to this?
Well, the demographic shift happened in a matter of 15, 20 years. And as is chronicled in the book, A Home on the Field, we see how the town sort of struggles and deals with the rapid migration of Latinos into the town to work at the plants. And, I've described it in the book as sort of the 5 stages of dealing with immigration, sort of like the 5 stages of dealing with death or grief. There's a period where people are in denial about how their town or community is changing. And there's even bargaining where people will say things like, well, once the economy goes down, they'll move on. They'll move on to somewhere else. And then there's an angry phase as well. And when I got to Siler City in 1999, that's about the place where the town was. The long-term residents were angry and confused about how their town was changing.
Paul, this story is pretty personal for you. Can you tell us how your own history has helped you identify with some of these Latino immigrants, especially the kids?
Yeah, my parents were originally from Peru. And I grew up dealing with the same sort of issues of assimilation and adapting to a new culture from my own background. And even having a mixed status family. My brothers were immigrants, and I was born here. And that's the case in many of these families. So I know what they're going through. I know how hard it is to adapt to a new culture and a new language.
It didn't take you very long to realize that soccer would be a great outlet for these boys. Why soccer?
Well, soccer is everything to this community. It's ingrained in the culture. It's the number one sport for many Latin Americans and for other people around the world. And there is this passion about it. And so the boys desperately wanted to play organized football and found that they couldn't do that at the schools, that the schools didn't offer soccer at the high school and didn't really want to.
When you say football, you mean soccer?
Of course.
But there were football teams at these high schools. Why didn't they join the other sports that the schools did have to offer?
I think a lot of the kids just felt alienated from the rest of the other activities at school. At the time, when I first got to Siler City, few Latinos participated in school clubs, other athletic teams, musical groups, whatever. They pretty much kept to themselves.
Paul, you became more than a soccer coach to these boys, and you became pretty close, almost like a father figure to some of them. I'm wondering if you could tell me about a couple of the boys who stand out in your mind, just so we can get to know them.
One kid that, of course, stands out in my mind, his name is Enrique in the book, and he was originally born in Chicago, and his family ended up fleeing from Chicago because once he turned 11, 12 years old, he began to be recruited by local street gangs. He didn't want to join. He got jumped and beaten up. And so his family fled to rural North Carolina. And I think that's indicative of a lot of people that have come to the Southeast or the rural areas of the Midwest. The migration is not only coming from Mexico or Latin America, but internally within the United States.
Out of the urban areas?
Yeah, out of the urban areas. They're seeking peace and tranquility. And quite frankly, they're finding it. I mean, Enrique has found a place for himself. He loves being a country boy. He loves the open areas. And he's a solid young man now, and he works in the plumbing industry. And he's looking to go into local law enforcement.
Tell us about another one of the boys.
Fish was our goalkeeper, and in his junior year, I ran into him over the summertime, and he seemed really down. And he explained to me that he was going to go back to Mexico because his grandmother was very, very ill. He ends up traveling back to Mexico to say goodbye. She's dying. But after some time, he feels the itch, the need to come back to North Carolina. North Carolina has become his real home by now. And he's left his school, his team, his girlfriend, and he desperately wants to get back. But the only way that Fish can actually get back is to cross the border. And he spends a perilous 3-4 days in the desert trying to get back to the United States. And eventually he's able to do so. The last day that he was actually eligible to play for us that season, he showed up at school, and he actually played that evening. There's a moment in the book where Fish and I are arriving at the field where we play, and he looks out at it, and I can just tell that he realizes that he's at home once he looks at that field.
Paul, your book documents the first 3 seasons of the Jets soccer team. That's the name of the team, the Jets. And it's amazing because it all culminates in a monumental showdown for the championship. And they win the state championship. That's the great surprise.
Yeah, we do.
How did you take a team when there was no soccer team at all at the high school and get all the way to the state championships? What do you attribute that to?
It was a combination of things. They had a real desire to prove themselves, and they had a lot of passion for the game. And they play a lot on their own. They needed to be organized, and they needed to learn how to play in a system. But a lot of them had a tremendous amount of talent to begin with. And they had a dream. They wanted to be champions. And once they began to believe in that, then it became so much easier to be able to get to that goal.
Well, I'd like you to read a little bit from your book about that moment when you had a kind of self-revelation that occurred immediately after your team won the championship. Would you mind reading that section from your book?
Sure. I slowly walked onto the field to join in. As I walked, I thought of all the players who had played for me during the past 3 seasons. Their faces whizzed past me, and I could see them running on our field back home. They were all champions now. No matter what happened in their lives, they would always know in their hearts that they could be the very best at something. When things were even, they could compete and win. Tears welled up in my eyes, and all that steadied me was the thought that I had done all these things, the organizing, the fighting, the cajoling, bargaining, outwitting, playing, sitting awake for many sleepless nights for my people. I realized they were all my people, Latinos. We had all come together on one team, Mexican, Guatemalan, El Salvadoran, Honduran, Peruvian, and American, to work together for a common goal. There are many people who think we cannot come together for a common cause. I knew this wasn't true. The team proved that. We can be one people. I had felt alienated and separated from everyone growing up in Ann Arbor. When there were few Latinos in the Midwest, I had spent a career writing and exploring Latino communities all over the country. But as I walked to join the Chavos, I knew I had found a home among them. They were bouncing up and down in their scrum, holding on to one another and screaming, "Somos campeones," we are the champions. I dived in among them.
Paul, your book is now required reading for incoming freshmen at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm wondering how much empathy you get. You talk about these kids and how difficult it is when they don't get their papers. I would assume that some readers or some in North Carolina might say, well, it should be difficult. They're illegal. They shouldn't be here. They should go back. How predominant is that sentiment?
Oh, I think it's there. I think that the issue is volatile, and there are lots of people on both sides of the aisle about it. And if you look at the cover of the book, I think every one of those kids on the cover of the book is now a father and is married and has established a life here. And time keeps moving on, and another generation is being born right after this one. So many people want to take us back to zero, but the migration has happened, and the migration keeps sort of moving forward. And the issue of illegality will be less and less of an issue, and it is so right now at the schools. The kids I coach today have fewer issues with regard to immigration because they were born in Siler City, and that's the next generation. That's going to end up being the future of that town.
Paul Cuadros is author of the book A Home on the Field, How One Championship Soccer Team Inspires Hope for the Revival of Small-Town America. Paul, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Peggy.